So it's been about a year since my Mulan video came out where I talked about why I was frustrated about the film, and I had a lot of words about it. About 32 minutes and 18 seconds of just pure why. So why am I bringing up Mulan 2020 again? Is it just to drag it in the mud and talk about its mistakes? Yes, the answer is yes on that, but not how you would think. I've done my work on Mulan 2020 being a train wreck and how it did some oh boy that's not good moments, but today I want to compare Mulan 2020 to Raya and the Last Dragon, and how they're both a form of cultural appropriation.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Now, I know what some people are going to say. What do you mean by cultural appropriation? Raya and the Last Dragon had a screenplay written by people of Southeast Asian descent, and there were a lot of Southeast Asian people involved in it. This is where I'm going to have to talk about what people think of when they hear cultural appropriation, and what cultural appropriation actually means. Cultural appropriation, or appropriation that occurs across the boundaries of cultures, is when members of one culture, outsiders, take for their own or for their own use items produced by a member or members of another culture, insiders. In this formulation and most definitional observation, appropriation itself is not an inherently immoral or even unusual occurrence. In fact, most art involves appropriation of some form. However, it is the power dynamic which alters the moral standing of the act of appropriation. Uneven or unparalleled power dynamics in which an act of cultural appropriation can be broken down into various subcategories, such as object appropriation, style appropriation, content appropriation, motif appropriation, and subject appropriation, create a space in which appropriation becomes questionable, and both intention and commodification must be examined. So, although cultural appropriation can be used to look at things through a critical lens, it is a neutral term. For example, cartoon series like Avatar: The Last Airbender and American Dragon Jake Long are a form of cultural appropriation. Even Marvel's recent film Shang-Chi is a form of cultural appropriation at its core. Western writers were influenced by Eastern designs and aesthetics. Cultural appropriation has happened subtly everywhere. Look at the food we eat, from hot dogs, hard-shell tacos, and this f***ing monstrosity that calls itself a pizza. Listen, I'm from the Midwest. I can talk mad trash about deep dish pizza.
It's a cornbread biscuit which you've melted cheese on, and then, in defiance of God and man and all things holy, you poured uncooked marinara sauce atop the cheese. Atop! The cheese! Atop the sauce! Naked, cold, on display like some sort of sauce hooer!
I mean, even the concept of the Christmas tree is a form of cultural appropriation, coming from Germanic roots. Most of us aren't German, but we still have Christmas trees. But if we want to take a look at ideas and concepts outside Western mindsets of cultural appropriation, we can look at Japan. Things like Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo use jazz and hip-hop as a Western cultural aesthetic in their Eastern projects. Like I said, in a research and educational bubble, like in this essay, cultural appropriation is neither good or bad. But of course there have been negative examples of cultural appropriation, such as the recent Mahjong incident when a group of white women said they were going to take the game of Mahjong and give it some flair, and I would say they promoted their design really poorly. As well as the conversation being had with Awkwafina for the better part of her early career appropriating hip-hop and black culture using what people deemed a black scent, which is its own complex conversation to unpack and talk about at a later time.
I'm open to the conversation. I think it really is something that I think is a little bit multifaceted and layered. And so, yeah.
Explaining and talking about cultural appropriation can be a little bit difficult, and sometimes hard and uncomfortable, so that's why I created my own personal scale of cultural appropriation cringe. Disclaimer, this isn't a proper scale, this is just my personal opinion on what I think is cringy cultural appropriation to, yeah, that's fine kind of a cultural appropriation. So my scale goes from Wu-Tang Clan to Gwen Stefani. So one of my favorite musical groups is the Wu-Tang Clan, who have made their career sampling music from the Shaw Brothers martial arts films, which is a form of cultural appropriation, but they do it with a sense of love and care. The RZA, the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, said this while filming his kung fu film, The Man with the Iron Fist. The Asian culture has given me a lot over the years, and for me to go there and give some of the old actors I used to watch some jobs, it was a blessing for me to do that. You can tell he genuinely respects and loves Asian culture. Whereas Gwen Stefani, during her peak of popularity, she had Harajuku girls and other cringy things that kind of felt like she was using other cultures because she thought it was cool and it was a neat aesthetic to use. But then when you look back at it, you go, oh boy, that's kind of not good. At the peak of Gwen Stefani's popularity with them, Margaret Cho, an Asian American comedian, said this in 2005. The Harajuku girls. I want to like them, and I want to think they're great, but I'm not sure if I can. I mean, racial stereotypes are really cute sometimes, and I don't want to bum everyone out by pointing out the minstrel show. I think it is totally acceptable to enjoy the Harajuku girls because there are not that many other Asian people out there in the media really, so we have to take whatever we can get. It sucks to know that this is how Asian people thought about Asian representation in 2005. But Gwen Stefani has stated in a recent interview in May 2021 about how she didn't think she was appropriating people's culture and on Margaret Cho's comments back in 2005. So I had this idea that I would have a posse of girls because I never got to hang with girls, and they would be Japanese, Harajuku girls, because those are the girls that I love. Those are my homies. That's where I would be if I had my dream come true. I would go live there and I would go hang out in Harajuku. If we didn't buy and sell and trade our cultures in, we wouldn't have so much beauty, you know? We learn from each other, we share from each other, we grow from each other. And all these rules are just dividing us more and more. I think that we grew up in a time where we didn't have so many rules. We didn't have to follow a narrative that was being edited for us through social media. We just had so much more freedom. Before I go into this, Gwen Stefani does make a reasonable point about blending cultures together and learning from each other. That's reasonable, but she still comes off to me as a super privileged white woman who has never been exoticized or fetishized over like she did with the Harajuku girls, while literally appropriating being a kawaii uwu Asian girl to sell both her Harajuku girl perfume and clothing line. And also not understanding why Margaret Cho felt so uncomfortable. But this video isn't about Gwen Stefani's white privilege, it's about Disney and cultural appropriation. So now, let's have a conversation about Disney making millions of dollars using cultural appropriation, from selling Moana and Raya dresses influenced by Maori and Southeast Asian cultures, to the toys of Jasmine and Pocahontas taking from Middle Eastern and Native American culture. Again, before I go into this, I'm not here to demonize Disney, but it is still a multi-million-dollar company who only cares about money. I think we need to just talk about Disney's cultural appropriation throughout the years. Now, before I go into this any further, I cannot emphasize this enough that you can still like Disney films you liked as children. It does not make you a monster, and you don't have to hate Disney films you enjoyed as a child. It is good to look at them through a critical lens and understand that, yes, it was entertaining, but maybe it was not good. Like, I still enjoy and quote Aristocats. That doesn't mean I'm blind to the fact that the Ching Chong cat is extremely offensive.
Shanghai, Hong Kong, egg foo young. Fortune cookie always wrong. That's a hot one.
But instead, I think this is a perfect way to see how Western media has become more mindful and respectful of other people and their cultures. I look at these more as milestone as Disney and its subsidiaries trying their best to be more authentic. I mean, two of the most memorable Disney films to me that I enjoyed as a child were the animated Mulan and Aladdin, that at their core are both heavily Orientalist, which means Eastern culture was heavily appropriated. In the case of Aladdin, there are a lot of oh boy, that's not good things about that film when re-looking at it now. From the Western's view of the Middle East through Orientalism, you see there's maybe kind of a bias. And to unpack the uncomfortable Orientalist mindset in it would deem its own video in the future. Whereas in Mulan, it was more they took everything from all different kind of East Asian cultures and smacked it in feudal China and was like, yeah, hey, that works. These two films are a perfect milestone to talk about the views of the West in the 90s. They weren't good, And as the years go on, you can tell that Disney is ever growing. They are being more mindful, and then when we reach 2016 and Moana comes out, they had a group of Polynesian people help make the film to understand the Maori culture. But again, it is still Disney, run by a bunch of white dudes helming the project, and selling toys and costumes based on Maori culture, and making a profit. Now, let's talk about Mulan 2020 and Raya and the Last Dragon. The reason I'm using these two to compare this duality of cultural appropriation is because Raya was praised for using Asian culture. Mulan 2020 was demonized for it. But the question is, why? Both were marketed as being stories about strong Asian women. Both have a cast entirely made up of Asian or Asian American actors and actresses, and both felt like they should be the spiritual successor to Mulan 1998. Why was Raya and the Last Dragon the Wu-Tang Clan on the cringe culture scale, and Mulan 2020 Gwen Stefani and the Harajuku girls on the scale? I think first and foremost, it's the world they are based in. You see, Raya is based in its own fantasy world that is heavily inspired by Southeast Asian cultures, ranging from Singapore, the Philippines, and Indonesia. One of the writers of Raya and the Last Dragon, Adele Lim, said this about building the world of Raya. Rather than the simpler task of having one Southeast Asian country being reflected in one Kumandran land, to Disney's credit, they really went deeper to find the underlying inspirations and cores and threads that ran through so many of the communities. And her writing partner, Kyuna Yen, also said this about making the world based in Southeast Asian culture. This is our chance to create our Southeast Asian Excalibur and our own Arthurian legend. It was something to celebrate, a culture that Adele and I grew up in, and to make legendary heroes that our kids can aspire to. By doing their research on the cultures, they wanted to incorporate them. Raya and the Last Dragon is very much a Southeast Asian story. You can tell by the designs of their clothing, the food, and the message of unity, and everyone is family. These help make the world feel relatable and Southeast Asian. Nico Kara said this about trying to make Mulan, the 2020 movie, feel authentic. Every aspect of the filmmaking here was meticulously researched, and not just by me, but across every department. We studied Chinese cinema, ancient Chinese art, historical accounts of war. In fact, we have a Tang Dynasty military expert we flew into Los Angeles to consult with me and my team as we were designing sequences so that we got them right. I mean, her explaining it like that, you should believe her. I mean, she directed a film called Whale Rider in 2002 that told the story of a Maori people in New Zealand and showed love and care for that culture. So she did the same for Mulan 2020, right? Is what I would be saying, but a lot of Chinese writers and creators rallied against this idea, such as Accented Cinema and C. Ren, whose videos have over 1 million views talking about the inaccuracies of Mulan when it comes to telling the actual poem of Mulan and the history of China. Chinese American writer Serena Lee wrote about why this felt a little tone deaf. The director, Nikki Caro, explained that she was not concerned about these historical accuracies. However, historical accuracy is crucial to delivering a compelling story, especially to an audience not familiar with the culture. By molding multiple dynasties, culture, and history that spans over 1,000 years into one film, it plants an incorrect and narrow view in many people's perception of Chinese history. Plus, we need to talk about who they're trying to be historically accurate for, because the original poem of Mulan has been rewritten for years, every time erasing Mulan's nomadic identity. From the Guardian article written by Jinggan Young, they say this: China has a tradition of use the past to serve the present. The Mulan legend has been adopted many times and the character's origins have changed to suit. Historians largely agree that Mulan was a member of the Proto-Mongolic Xianbei people who lived in northern China in the 5th century. Over time, her nomadic identity has been removed and replaced with that of the dominant Han ethnicity, so claiming this new Mulan is an authentic version of the legend is especially ironic at a time when China is cracking down on Mongolian cultural identity. So just think about this. The director notes that they're being historically accurate and want to be a celebration of East Asian culture, only to have people of that culture say it wasn't, and it was more tone deaf. So now, let's talk about how they handled the Asian mythology and spirituality they wanted to represent in the films. So before we go into this, we need to talk about Mushu from Mulan 1998. If I'm being honest, I don't like Mushu that much in the film, and I wasn't let down when he wasn't in the movie. So Mushu is a very inaccurate depiction of Chinese dragons because one, none of them speak like Eddie Murphy, and two, Chinese dragons don't breathe fire. They actually control storms and bring great luck. They just kind of brought the fire from Western dragons, while also symbolizing the royalty of China, specifically the emperor. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we're going to be talking about the authenticity of mythology they were using in their respective films. So let's talk about how Raya used mythology. So the dragon in the title Raya and the Last Dragon is called Sisu. Sisu is based on the Southeast Asian Naga. The Nagas are protectors of the water realm. Whenever we go to temples or anything that relates to water, you're going to see symbols of Naga as a protector. Lao visual anthropologist Steve Aronsak, who worked as a consultant in the film, said. So it is safe to say they did take little creative liberties here and there, but the dragon, or Naga in Raya, does have features of the Naga. Its entire magic is centered around water. They again took time and research on this topic, but in Mulan, they use a phoenix that replaces Mushu. But from what I've read, the phoenix seems to be more based on the Western idea of the phoenix than the Eastern idea of the phoenix. The Eastern phoenix is also known as the Feng Huang. In Chinese mythology, the Eastern phoenix is supposed to represent the Empress to the Emperor's dragon. They work as a type of yin and yang, a duality of male, female, and hard and soft and whatnot. So Mulan being followed by this phoenix doesn't make a lot of sense, besides, look at this cool aesthetic shot of this phoenix behind her. It's like she's being reborn in her true self, even though Chinese phoenixes don't actually do that. But where Mulan falls the worst is how they represented Qi. I'm again gonna pull from that Guardian article I talked about. Perhaps most jarring is the decision made by the film's 4 credited screenwriters to strip our heroine of any flaws, bestowing her instead with a mystical force. To do this, they repurpose an element of Chinese culture known as qi, which translates as breath or air. Philosophers describe it as a type of energy or living metabolism in all beings, though not a special individual power. In the film, Qi gives Mulan superhuman physical powers. A counterpoint can be made that we have seen Qi and Qi adjacent energies being used as a power source before. Look at things in anime like Naruto and Dragon Ball Z. But where I think this becomes jarring is that we are talking again about taking time and care with cultures that you want to represent, and how they make Mulan being gifted with a high amount of Qi compared to others, and how the main witch also has this high Qi energy, and it's depicted in the concept that isn't its traditional use, but more like a magic system in a Western fantasy tale. So when you're a Western audience watching this Eastern film made by Disney and white people, it just comes off a little Orientalist. I have talked about this in my Snake Eyes video, but it's the Western view of how we view countries of the East as mystical and exotic. But an argument can be made that Mulan's movement and use of Qi is supposed to be a homage to wuxia kung fu films, representing things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Jet Li's Hero. But they never brought up Super Saiyan Qi in any of those films. Those people could just do great wire fu. The reason I really want to hit on this is most Western audiences aren't going to know what Qi really is and how it works, and it's actually used in things like Chinese medicine and healing. So this again makes the concepts of Qi look very Orientalist to a Western audience. But the biggest factor to why Raya in The Last Dragon was praised for good representation and Mulan was mocked for it is just very simple. One was trying to be Asian enough, and the other one wanted to show a culture not many people know about. Mulan felt like it was trying to pander to Chinese audiences by putting in buzzwords like Qi and honor, hollow words of authenticity. They rested on ideas of what Western audiences already thought of Chinese history from films they've seen. Raya and The Last Dragon took time and care while handling the Southeast Asian cultures they wanted to portray. They wanted to show an overlooked Asian culture that is different than the normal East Asian cultures like Japan, China, and Korea we see in most of our media in America. The deeper problem with Mulan just being Asian enough is Mulan had a mostly white production team, the writing staff, the costume design, hell, even the director was white. The only really predominant Asian people in that film were just the actors and the stunt teams. While yes, Raya and The Last Dragon didn't have an Asian director, but the writing team to the art team had people of Southeast Asian descent working on this film. Like, sure, one minor thing is that the voice cast was more composed of East Asian actors, and I wish they would have had tried to get more Southeast Asian talents besides Kelly Matran. But all in all, Raya shows love and care with how they portray and handle Southeast Asian culture. The reason I know this is because I'm Southeast Asian. I felt it from the first scene of Raya and her dad making soup similar to something my mom would make, to the main idea of concept of community as family is a big belief in Filipino culture. The reason why I want to write and talk about this was because I recently saw Marvel's Shang-Chi, and that movie, like Raya and the Last Dragon, meant a lot to me. Sure, they are definitely pandering to certain audiences. Raya's overall story still feels like a generic Disney princess film, and Shang-Chi's finale ended up being a generic Marvel fight. But the one thing that I saw was articles praising Disney and Marvel for making great films with good Asian representation. Which, yeah, they had the money to do so, but almost a year ago before this is the same company being praised for positive Asian representation that put out Mulan 2020, a tone-deaf oriental view of Asians in the media. In the end, Disney only cares about a profit. Like, again, I really love Raya and the Last Dragon, but I do feel kind of weird knowing Disney is making bank with cultural appropriation by selling cute Southeast Asian inspired Raya dolls and Halloween costumes. And that's what I wanted to bring up here, is that Disney has made money through cultural appropriation. From things like Aladdin, Mulan, Moana, and now even Raya. I don't think we should praise Disney, a faceless company, for good and positive representation of cultures. I think we need to praise the teams behind the projects, like Raya and the Last Dragon and Shang-Chi, because they're the ones who took time and care in portraying authentic Asian representation. That's why I tried to quote the Southeast Asian people on the team who worked on Raya. And we also need to call out bad and misinformed media depictions of Asian culture. Not just to dunk on them, but to talk about how we should be better. We should have these conversations about cultural appropriation. It's always going to happen, but I would rather see more appreciation than misrepresentation. And Disney was a perfect lens to look at the duality of cultural appropriation. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see my other videos about Asians in the media, there's a link that should be here now. If you like what you see, give this video a like, share it around, maybe even subscribe. I do make that spicy content, you know. I try to make at least 2 videos a month, but follow me on Twitter to see me repost all my friends' cosplays or my bad hot takes. Or if you want to support me, you can do so on Patreon. The links are down below. As well as keep on keeping on, and if you haven't heard it today, you matter, your opinions are valid, and whatever you're going through, you've got this, cowboy.